Come along as Kevin and I attempt the longest backpacking trip we've ever done in one of the most remote wildernesses in the United States. But wait, let's go back and talk about how we ended up in one of the country's least visited national parks that's located in the Arctic Circle. 5 years ago, I was mindlessly scrolling the internet when I came upon a 2016 blog from a Nat Geo photographer who was on a mission to see all 59 national parks in 52 weeks with his partner for the National Park Service's 100th anniversary. I've been interested in the parks ever since my first visit to Glacier National Park in 2010, but one park in particular from their blog caught my eye, Gates of the Arctic in Alaska. They did a pack raft trip on the Noatak River, and I was immediately entranced by the idea of ending up somewhere so remote in the safety of a guided trip. I mean, it was 2020. Can you blame me? Part of my family moved out to Montana when I was in middle school, and we had the opportunity to visit them for the first time in 2010. This trip brought me a newfound interest in traveling and hiking, so I continued to visit and hike as much as I could throughout high school and college. Eventually, I tried backpacking for the first time. All my trips during this time were a few 1- and 2-night hikes, all with borrowed gear. Investing in some of my own gear, I took Kevin on his first trip with my family in Montana. We then moved to Maine, and with mountains in our backyard, took our first trip alone. A 2-day, 1-night hike along the Appalachian Trail. This year was the first year Kevin and I attempted several hikes, the longest being a 4-day, 3-night route, which we ended up bailing on after night 1 due to weather. So it's safe to say we were nervous and unsure how we would feel on a trip of 9 total days of camping and hiking. Despite our nerves, we had quadruple checked the gear list, packed our bags, and were ready to figure out if this was going to be an adventure or a bust. We were able to get some much-needed sleep after a long travel day and had a few hours to explore Fairbanks. We made a run for some last-minute gear and finally met our group at Pike's Waterfront Lodge, a kitschy hotel just a few minutes outside the Fairbanks airport. Our group consisted of me, Kevin, Doug, our fellow groupmate, and Brian, our guide. After a pizza dinner debrief and a gear check, we headed back to our rooms to pack everything up. I'm leaving this whole shot in here. Can you count how many times the bear can goes in and out of my bag? We struggled just a little bit to pack our 50+ pound bags. The next day would be the official start to our trip. After a final shower and leaving the comfort of our hotel, we headed to the airport to fly to the bush town of Bettles. This 10-seater plane was the smallest plane I had ever flown in. Once we got in the air, we were greeted with expansive views of the untouched northern Alaskan wilderness. We landed in Bettles to gray skies and rain. After unloading the plane, we anxiously waited to hear from Brian on when our flight out to the park would be. the weather had us feeling pessimistic about our chances as bush pilots can only fly by sight and the cloud ceiling was low. With no scheduled flight time out, we took a quick tour of the town of Bettles, a place home to 14 year-round residents and the only ranger station for Gates of the Arctic National Park. The waiting game began and we spent our day hanging out in the Bettles Lodge. When it was clear we would not be flying out that day, we set up our tents in an airplane hangar and went on a short 4-mile walk to get the legs moving. Went to sleep that night anxious to know if we would be able to get out to the park the following day. The morning of day 2 came and the weather wasn't looking promising. Despite the continued rain and gray skies, we headed down to the lake to get on our flight during a short weather window. Flying in a floatplane is hands down one of the coolest experiences we've ever had. While we fly, I want to take some time to share some information about our ultimate goal destination, the Arrogetch Peaks. Designated a National Natural Landmark in 1968, the Arrogetch Peaks have long been a landmark to the native Nunavut people of Inuit Pat in northwest Alaska. Arrogetch, meaning fingers of the hand extended in the Inuit Pat language, are made of rugged granite pinnacles that were carved from resistant granitic rock by glacial ice and running water. The rock faces rise as much as 3,000 to 4,000 feet above the adjacent valley bottoms. There are several small cirque glaciers that exist within the area that is home to both tundra and boreal forest. Our pilot brought us to our destination, landing in a lake alongside the Alatna. We quickly unloaded our gear from the plane and watched as our only way out of the wilderness flew away.
Look at the rudders! Yeah. I got it. Holy shit!
As we start our hike, I want to mention that there are no official maintained trails in the park. Anytime you see us hiking on something that resembles a trail, it's a game trail or, unfortunately, social trails made from the impact of human visitors in the park. It was quite common for us to be walking along a very clear trail and suddenly lose it completely. Our main navigation tool was Brian, who was constantly checking maps to make sure we were going in the right direction. After our first successful night, we packed up camp and headed up the valley. We had all agreed the day prior that we would aim for a long day of hiking with the goal of making up the time we lost waiting in Bettles. We began the long haul up the Creek Valley and were greeted with some glimpses of the Arrogetch Peaks early on. One thing we quickly learned bushwhacking: don't follow the person in front of you too closely. It often results in a branch or several to the face. The other thing we learned: stare at your feet. This is something we've learned hiking in New England, but bushwhacking in Alaska was a whole new level of holes, rocks, roots, or otherwise uneven ground waiting to snap ankles. And unfortunately, mine did just that. Or rather, my soccer-weary ankle rolled when I stepped just a little too far to the side, so I was ending day 2 of our hike with a sprained ankle.
The camp is like right at the closest arm coming down.
Spirits were high as we reached our night 2 camp and officially caught up with our original itinerary. We set up what would be our base camp for the next 3 days at the base of the Arrogetch Peaks. 2 valleys split to either side of a peak called Elephant's Tooth. We would spend day 3 hiking up the south one and day 4 hiking up the north. While Brian had topo maps, we couldn't reliably know what land formations awaited us at the end of each valley, especially considering it's highly likely the maps could be few years or more out of date since this location is so remote. Day 3 quickly became one of the highlights of our trip, and you'll soon see why.
This is so cool.
It doesn't bother me that much because I've experienced As we hiked deeper into the valley, we came to our first split, in which we went to the right up and over a small hill. At the top of this hill, the valley split further. There was a rock scramble to a peak and a ledge where we didn't know what was on the other side, maybe a lake. We decided to take the maybe a lake option first, and wow, were we greeted with a beautiful, very much there lake. The water was clearer than anything I've ever seen in my life. Surrounded by sheer granite rock walls, this place felt untouched by the human definition of time. It was clear that this entire valley had been carved by glaciers, and when we rounded the corner of the lake, we could see the very last remnants of what that glacier used to be.
Ready.
Good.
It's often hard to do justice describing a unique natural land formation in words, but never have I felt smaller and more insignificant than I did standing in the proverbial shadow of the maidens. And I mean this in the best way possible. Nature is crazy and it creates amazing and wonderful things.
Alright, this is making oops. Like if they don't put this in there.
I did the same thing. We spent most of the day hiking through the river valley in a beautiful green meadow, but this day was definitely a low point on our trip. At several points throughout the day, we found ourselves crossing boulder fields of very wet rocks. Kevin and I are very competent rock hoppers, but add in 24 hours of rain and it's nearly impossible to cross them without slipping every few steps. It's also exhausting. At one point, Kevin found himself shin deep in water, which meant he now had 2 wet boots that were unlikely to dry out for the rest of the trip. When we reached the end of the valley, we were met with extraordinary views, but at this point, we were freezing and soaked through. We headed back and it was a quiet hike among the group as we all suffered through the slippery rocks and rain. I unfortunately also slipped in the river at the end, soaking through one of my boots for the rest of the trip. My ankle sprain also came back to haunt me today as hiking became decently painful by the end of the day. The next day we woke up to, you guessed it, more rain. But spirits were higher than the day before as we packed up our base camp and headed out of the creek valley and towards our pickup point. We had to do a small river crossing every time we went to and from our kitchen site, and the 2 days of rain had raised the water levels a decent amount. It unfortunately caused both me and Doug to join Kevin in the Wet Boots Club. We had a decent amount of climbing to do today, so we worked our way above bush level and spent the day side hilling to our next camp. Brian was able to tape my ankle that morning, which helped me immensely on this day. Once we were high enough, clouds obscured our views from across the valley, but every once in a while we'd get a peek at the looming mountains across from us. At one point in the hike, Brian decided to cut over a mile off of our day by going straight up a mountainside. We were all game to just heads down, chug up the mountain at our own pace. I'll never forget Doug's response of, "Sweet," when Brian said we're going straight up the mountainside. The hill was also covered in blueberries. There had been blueberries periodically throughout our trip so far, but this was the highest concentration of them we had seen. It was impossible to not stop every few steps and grab a handful. We finally got to our proposed campsite, and the first thing we noticed was that the water source was dried out. We sat in the rain as Brian went to find us water. Coming back only a few minutes later, we all sighed in relief because we didn't have to keep hiking and we could set up the kitchen tarp to get out of the rain. The thing about hiking in the rain is you're wet, but you're warm because you're constantly moving. While we gladly sat out of the rain in the safety of our tarp, we also quickly started to get cold. Brian went ahead and boiled water for all of us to sit with to try and warm up as we waited for him to make dinner. At one point, Brian said, "Yeah, this sucks," and we all laughed in agreement because 3 days of straight rain was starting to get old. We ate an early dinner and went into our tents just so we could get out of our wet clothes and into the warmth of our sleeping bags. The relief of being dry in our sleeping bags didn't last long as we woke up the next day to, you didn't guess it, snow. It rained and snowed all through the night, so the inside of our tent was officially damp, and so were the outsides of our sleeping bags. Our boots were indeed still soaked and now freezing cold. And by the way, there's no reason to put dry socks on when your boots are already wet, so we started each morning putting on damp socks into cold, wet boots. I let Brian know this was too much of the Alaskan experience because snow was not on my radar. Reminder, it's early August. We all did what we could to stay warm while eating breakfast and packing up.
God, cold.
Hiking in the snow, we headed up and over the last mountain in between us and our last campsite. I unfortunately started to feel quite nauseous and not well the higher up we went. Brian was concerned my body wasn't able to keep itself warm enough, so we hustled to get on the other side of the mountain and down into warmer temps. In the last push to get to our site, we were back in the bush, pushing through trees and bushes. The relief we all felt when we finally arrived at our campsite was immense. The sun poked in and out of the clouds, it wasn't raining or snowing, and we were able to set out all of our gear to dry. A bonus, I was no longer nauseous and feeling back to myself. Vibes at dinner that night were high, as there was only a half-mile walk between us and where the float plane would be picking us up tomorrow. On our last morning in the bush, we woke up to beautiful, clear blue skies and a bright, warm sun. Despite the lack of clouds, rain, and snow, it was the coldest morning we had all trip. My wet boots were now ice, and we again spent the morning attempting to stay warm. Brian sent a message to the pilots letting them know the weather was clear, and we packed up camp. We reached our pickup spot at the lake, and I think we all sighed in relief to the idea of a warm, dry bed and a nice long shower. We all got excited when we heard the distant sound of a plane coming in our direction. The excitement faded quickly though, as it was clear that plane was destined for a different pickup or drop-off. It only took 2 more passing planes to make us realize we'd be hanging out on the lakeside for a while. We arrived at about 8 a.m. and we ultimately wouldn't leave until about 3:30 p.m. So we spent the day chatting, taking naps, reading, and baking in the warm sun. Our itinerary had us staying one more night camped out in the airplane hangar at Bettles. When we arrived back in town, we all celebrated with a beer and the use of a flush toilet. We had officially made it back, and it came with such a bittersweet feeling. 9 days ago, we were all total strangers agreeing to go on a relatively physically and mentally challenging trip. We had no idea what the dynamics would be like and how we would all match up in our physical abilities. But in the end, it was perfect. While we had various technical strengths and weaknesses, we were all at the same physical capability and had the mental fortitude to deal with tough times. Spirits only fell low a few times, but it was quite infrequent that you didn't hear laughs or conversation flowing. I'm forever grateful to Kevin, who was willing to take this trip with me. Maybe it's recency bias, but this is hands down one of my favorite things we've ever done. The journey came faster than I expected, but I'm so grateful that I can still go out and try new things, challenge myself, and grow in unexpected ways. This trip allowed me to disconnect from all the stuff that comes with life and just live in the moment. I'm forever grateful for that.